For today's session, I'm happy to introduce our speakers from Athabasca University, Dr. Martin Connors, Professor and Canada Research Chair in Space Science, Instrumentation and Networking, Dr. Evelyn Ellerman, Associate Professor with the Communication Studies, Dr. Lisa Carter, the Dean of Science and Technology, and Mr. Tony Tin, the Head of Digital Initiatives. I will now turn the mic over to Dr. Martin Connors to begin today's session. Please begin. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for asking me to do this, and I would like to start by seeing if there are any elephants around. We tend to think of ourselves as a mouse, and if any elephants are listening, let's not forget that there is a fable where the elephant ignoring the mouse ended up in a kind of a bad way. However, I'm assuming that most of us are mice, and therefore that's the lead into the title of the talk. So the idea from our previous Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, is that if you're sleeping with an elephant, and he was referring at that time to the United States, I guess he slept around a little bit, but that's a different matter. He was referring to a country. One is affected by every twitch and grunt. So, in other words, small things that the elephants do can affect the mice in quite a profound way. So, basically, Athabasca University, let's claim that it had a very unique mandate for the time, within Canada anyway, and it's been able to do its own thing for decades, and I'm going to venture to say actually do it quite well. However, the scene has changed dramatically, and the next slide, which I will go to in a moment, should show you just how much that has changed. I gave a talk in the spring about strategic assessment, and believe me, so much has happened since the spring that we just have to constantly reassess. So what we're trying to answer is, as small institutions in a world that now has large institutions coming into it, how can we contribute? How can we benefit so that the advantages and contributions we think we can make remain around? And there's another interesting development. The elephants, which in the spring I identified as individual elephants, they're not just individuals anymore. They formed into herds of elephants. So let's move on and see if I can change the slide here. Great. And look at the New York Times, which has had quite a bit of interesting reporting about developments in education. So Thomas Friedman, a renowned reporter, wrote in May that there was going to be a college education revolution, and that there was a disconnect between what was possible and what was needed, and not only needed, but he claims that big breakthroughs happen. These are all direct quotes, by the way, despite the lack of quote marks. There is some excerpting. Big breakthroughs happen when what is suddenly possible meets what is desperately necessary. He basically was referring to the possibility of offering large-scale internet courses. Then in July, we have the startup from MIT of their online electronics course, which incidentally, just you may find it interesting that our own electronics technician took this course, so I had a very close look at it, and they had 150,000 students, of whom 7,000 or so graduated, in the sense that they passed a final exam, did all the assignments, and got a certificate, non-credential certificate. And Anant Agarwal, who started this out, said that he thought maybe 200 students would be interested. He was quite surprised when, after they announced the availability, they were getting 10,000 registrations a day. So there's huge demand for this sort of thing, as I'm sure everybody knows. Then an interesting development that, as I did mention in my previous talk, credentialing is of great interest to students, no surprise there. And now we find standard universities are offering credits for these massively open courses. So then we find another interesting development later in September. These consortia, Coursera for example, edX was mentioned above, are getting larger, so people are joining them. and in this case it even mentions that they have their own open source platform for presentation of courses called Class2Go. Finally, an interesting point is that unfortunately for us public providers, let's say, the University of Phoenix has kind of given a very bad impression about distance education. I have a very hard time figuring out what the University of Phoenix actually is. The latest conclusion is that it's basically a student loan feeding mechanism, a vampire on student loans. But of course they do have some credible offerings as well in specialized areas. So it's kind of interesting to see that presumably under the pressure of some of the things that are going on, University of Phoenix has actually drawn back a little bit. Oh, and of course you may recall, I've changed and I won't go back, but you may recall my fondness for Chinese proverbs. May you live in interesting times is a pseudo-Chinese proverbs, but we certainly do live in interesting times. Now, this is actually from Time magazine, and military intelligence is not a contradiction in terms. I'm hoping that intelligence within universities is also not a contradiction in terms. As you will recall from the previous talk, if you heard it, or I'm going to blow my own horn and suggest that you go look at it online, but Sun Tzu describes how you make net assessments, and I would hate to imply that these larger universities are our enemies, but you have to look at those who are around you, and let's not consider them adversaries, but they may end up rolling over and squishing us. So I don't know what you really call something like that aside from an elephant. So know your enemy and know yourself. In 100 battles you will never be defeated. And that's the important one. So we have to do self-assessment, and we have to assess the larger world, what's going on with these large institutions. So let us go on to do that. So the self-assessment, and in fact I won't be assessing too much the external, I think that you pretty well know that, but a self-assessment, and I'm going to claim that this type of assessment could be relevant points for any other small institution to look at. What is the Athabasca University position? Well, first of all, we are a well-established player. We've been around for, I guess, about 30 plus years now. We do have a high quality staff. There are many people with large experience in distance education, many people who can work on your courses and make them look great and work well, and we're looking at new things. An interesting one is that we have a continuous enrollment model. So for example, the electronics course that I referred to, it was one-off. You signed up, you did your assignments at the right time, and you wrote the exam at the right time, and then it was done. So there are pluses and minuses to our continuous enrollment model, but basically it has worked rather well for many years. And you know, we should maybe look at some variations, and in fact people do. They're so-called paced, but it works. The tutor model is also something that in my experience, which is fairly long, has actually worked quite well. One of the advantages of this model is that it is scalable, so that as your needs expand, you can hire more tutors and in principle expand the ability to service students at a relatively low cost. Very important in my mind is that we are able to give a credible credential. That is to say that in part due to the efforts of the registrar's office, we can tell people what their document is worth. You can take it to University X and they will say, oh yes, that's equivalent to course Y, and you know, we're happy to give you credit for it. So that's great. We also have an established internet presence, so that's also very good. And the home study model that we're working with is very familiar to us. So all these things are strengths. Now what about weaknesses? There are, I think AU people know, internal problems, so let's not talk any more about that. In certain ways we have a relatively high cost course model. We have course fees that are comparable to those for individual courses at other North American, or Canadian anyway, universities. And on a world scale, that's certainly high cost. In a world where we have people like MIT, or institutions like MIT coming in and saying, you know, basically you can access our content and do stuff with us for free, we have a very high cost course model. We are physically isolated. That does work against us. You know, MIT is right next to Harvard, so these guys could talk to each other. We have difficulty with that. We are Canadian. I don't want to belabor the point, but our national constitution actually actively works against the type of distance education that we're trying to do. We have a dispersed and ineffective work model. This was brought in the 90s, and the thought, which I bought into for quite a long time, was that our students are dispersed, so therefore our workers can be. In my opinion, this is a very bad thing. The rewards system may not reward work at the cutting edge of the technologies that we need. It has, in my experience, been difficult to make changes. And we are underfunded or malfunded. That can come back in part to being Canadian and in part to other things. So basically those two slides are my strategic assessment. They do apply, most of them, to Athabasca University, but I would say that many of the points I have touched on can be looked at more broadly in other, probably relatively small institutions, although some of them apply to anybody. So I would just like to briefly touch on some small steps I've been taking to move forward in this world. One of them is that I think we should partner with people. So I already have an established partnership with MIT, and you can see some course materials that I have developed based on largely transcribing some of the materials that are available for physics from MIT, which apparently are widely watched on YouTube, and I'm not sure how far people actually go, because it is quite a demanding thing to actually do a complete physics course. But anyway, I've looked at trying to transcribe the whole thing, and then to make some nice add-ons, like some nice notes that are well typeset with some nice drawings, of which this one was produced by me. We are also looking at possibly using high-resolution snapshots of the comparable drawings that were drawn on the board by the lecturer from MIT. Now here's Open Yale. I got quite interested in Open Yale, and in fact worked all the way through one of their courses on ancient Greek history. So those of us who think of me as a physicist, I do have other interests. However, if you look at the Open Yale materials, you find this. There's a nice list of stuff that you should know the meanings of, and then this PDF file made up from course notes has had all its images removed for copyright reasons. So if we could help Open Yale with that, maybe that would be nice. Let's see if the PDF type thing works. So I've been doing a museum photography project, and the idea is to make some copyright-free images that could be used by Open Yale. And once I have this ready and on our Open Course site, then I'm going to go say to Open Yale, hey, you know, we can do something to help you. So I'm going to speed up a little bit because my time is sort of running out. We have specific expertise, and I'm sure all listeners, you have very specific expertise that can be identified. For example, in this MIT pilot course that had 150,000 enrollments, we would have loved it if our lab technician had had lab kits to work with, but there wasn't any. And that's one of our specialties. So we can go to MIT and say, you know, why don't you have an electronics lab? And here's how we can help you do it. So you go and you look at your strengths and bring them to people who may or may not have those strengths. I'm hesitant to go to MIT and tell them we could do something in labs that they can't. But, you know, I do know we can do it. I don't know if they can't. So anyway, just to reiterate, I think some of these points are appropriate for everybody to look at. I think doing strategic assessments is extremely important, and I hope that my comments can be helpful to some of you, and that we may have a chance to discuss a bit later. Thank you. I'll turn it back to the moderators.
Thanks very much, Martin. I think we'll roll right into Evelyn. If you're ready to go then, Evelyn.
Yes, thanks very much, Tracy. Hi, everybody. My name is Evelyn Ellerman, and I work with the Communication Studies program at the university. In fact, I originated it and continue to coordinate it, along with a new initiative at the university, which is a virtual media lab, which we're calling the eLab, and which will officially launch next Friday. Now, this particular lab, you can't hear me, Lisa, just a minute. Let me see if I can raise up my speaker volume here. Yeah, can you hear me better now? Yeah, okay, fine. This particular lab is the result of, I guess, sort of wishing and wondering on the part of the communication program about 10 years ago when we were still predominantly in an older format for distance education. We would have liked to have had this, but there was no funding and no infrastructure at the time. So a couple of years ago, though, it happened. The proposal was taken on by the university. Money was found from a variety of sources, both governmental and corporate. And as a result, we're opening the lab this coming week. So we envisioned this lab to be something similar to what labs at universities, at physical situations in universities can be, places where people teach and learn, places where they conduct their research, where they demonstrate the results of their research, their learning, where they meet one another, and so on. So how could we do that in a virtual environment? That was the task that we set for ourselves. So we've taken a number of themes. The first one, because we're a school, obviously, is learning. And the first of the areas that we began to concentrate on was something that we call the virtual tool cupboard. And here we're using the lab in many ways as an aggregative space, so pulling together resources that are already being used across the university and that people knew of and so on. So sort of one place at the university where you could guddle around and find things that would help you in your teaching, your learning, your research, and so on. So the lab has categories of tools, visualization tools, organizational tools, and so on. And within those, we have seeded the cupboard with a number of resources, but it's open for anybody at the university, any faculty member at the university, to add something to the categories. And we have sample assignments there as well for those faculty members who are not used to using digital tools in their teaching, as Martin is, simply to see how some of these things can work. So you can guess that we're very much at the beginning of this. Establishing a resource like this is one thing. Altering the culture within the community, especially a community of teachers, is another altogether. Here's an example of one of the categories that we have. Visualization and data analysis is something that's particularly useful for people at studying university online. And one of the main projects that we have that uses this kind of analysis was an externally funded project called Canadian Film Online. We have partners with the Toronto International Film Festival and the National Archives of Canada, and the project was funded by Heritage Canada. And what it does is it tries to rectify a rather sad situation in Canada, and that is that the distribution system for the film industry has been controlled by the Americans forever. And most Canadians, therefore, hardly ever get to see their own films and know nothing about them. So this is a database of several thousand feature films that have been made since 1960 with a whole suite of interviews, people from the industry, and all kinds of other material. And the people using the database then can generate maps and network graphs and so on to find out about the production of film in this country. We've developed many online resources in the building of the eLab. That's one of them, and I'll talk about a couple of the other ones in a minute. But the lab is there to help internal partners make projects come alive, as well as demonstrate what is possible in such a lab. And so we've been focusing on those kinds of things over the last year or two. One of the things we've been quite active in doing, and we have about a dozen of these workshops up right now, is producing short workshops. These are available, as is pretty much everything in the lab, available to anybody in the world. These are short self-guided workshops that are geared to helping people to improve their study skills, their research skills, their digital literacy in various kinds of ways. You can see from looking at the titles there, the kinds of things that we've started with. Now, what we're trying to do with the lab and with parts of the lab, like the workshop, is to produce loops back and forth from courses to in this case, the workshops. So if you're in a course on storytelling, and we're about to open one on digital storytelling, and you feel that your own ability to work with digital images or edit things online is maybe not all that strong, you can dodge out of the course, go to the workshop, play around, learn a bit more, come back in. Or if you're a member of the general public or a student who hasn't yet found out about that course, you may play around with the workshops, and then there'll be suggestions that if you want to learn more, you can move into one of the courses. So this is one of the things that we're experimenting with, that other universities have obviously done, but we're trying to, in this very fragmented space that we work in, that Martin was talking about, trying to knit things together a bit. One of the parts of the lab that has been open for some time is ePortfolio. This is used in many programs across the university, but particularly in the Masters of Distance Education program. There are currently several hundred people using this, and so we're now beginning to gather the data that we need to understand how best to use this at the university. While this is new to us, it's just as new, I think, to most universities in Canada. We are woefully behind many other parts of the world, Europe, the United States, and Australia, I think of immediately, where ePortfolio has been used for a long time. And so we lean quite heavily on the knowledge that's already been developed. But so we've got internally programs that are being rewritten so that they have this element to them. Capstone programs and courses are being put together. But the ePortfolio has opened up another door for us, and that is to partnerships with external organizations, particularly professional associations. So the eLab right now has partnerships with several human service related organizations, psychologists, social workers, mental health workers, and so on, all of whom have to certify and recertify on a regular basis in order to keep their credentials current. None of those organizations has the internal capacity to host and maintain an ePortfolio facility, and so an association with the university is something that is very appealing to them. And of course, because we're a school, we're not only interested in that side, but we're interested as well in the possibilities of working with these organizations on developing courses and course elements. So this has been very interesting to us as well, and we are just actually embarking on quite a large research project in that area. Connecting is obviously a very important theme for an online media lab, and the eLab has lots of initiatives in this area. The workshops that I mentioned is one of them, but the sub-project of the lab is our own Facebook style facility at the university called The Landing, and this is something that the university is very proud of. Thousands of people now use the Landing, which is open to anybody with an AU login. People are now beginning to build courses in that space, largely because of one of the problems that Martin alluded to, and that is that our course production side of the university still has some catching up to do with respect to the timelines that it takes us to mount courses and so on. So if we want courses to be a lot more nimble and responsive, this is one addition to the quiver of tools that we happen to have. I don't know, that's a strange metaphor, but anyway, at the university, and as well as the normal sorts of things that you would think would happen in a social media space. We have a showcase area of the lab, and again, we're mounting material up there in preparation for our launch next Friday. The list here below is a sample, as broad a sample as we could think of, to put in there for the things that we've been working on, and again, these will link to possible courses that people can take. Now, as part of the fact that we're an open university with a mission to remove barriers to education, and in concert with the UNESCO chair, the eLab has been working with the chair on a number of initiatives. We are currently taking a media and information literacy resource that was developed by UNESCO and chopping it down to a smaller kind of self-study piece that the university will host, and that is geared towards women and girls in developing countries. Our chair has written in concert with George Siemens a doctoral level course on open educational resources, and now we've been asked to move that down and reshape it for the use of undergraduate students in the communication program, and that's something that we're engaged in now. So this eLab as a kind of exploratory space and support for other sorts of things that are going on at the university, we think has a lot of potential. We've engaged in many research projects over the last year and a half, many of which are geared at mobile learning. And so there's been a lot of app development. We've been engaged in largely as a means of improving the university's capacity in this area. So, can we do these well? Do we understand the use for them? How can we apply them? How can that improve what we do? Those are the kinds of questions that we've been engaging in. So some of them have been very workplace-oriented sorts of things. The Wellness in the Workplace app, for which we won an award at the university recently, was one of those. The part of the premise of that is we all get chained to these machines for a very long time every day, and how do we maintain our wellness? How do we push back from the machine, stretch and breathe and so on? And so this is a programmable thing that the user can basically decide, when do I want it to remind me and how do I want it to remind me and so on, to basically take a step back. The one listed just below that, we worked with the Edmonton Mennonite Centre for Newcomers, which is one of the largest settlement organizations in Canada, and they're located here where most of us happen to live. And so they they have a bridging program for people who've come from other countries who are qualified as accountants, but who were finding a hard time settling in, I guess, to Canadian workplaces. And so the material was developed by the partner, and then we worked with them to produce a mobile-friendly educational piece that these accountants could work on in their own time, so that they would fit in better to the workplace. So we've done quite a bit of work like that, and we have others planned. So that's kind of a quick overview of what we have been doing. Now, one of the things I'll just say, just as I finish this, is that of course all of this work leads us to consider all sorts of questions, and one of them is the kinds of relationships that we engage in with the community, and specifically in our case with professional associations. Exactly what sorts of affordances does the production of open access materials and that kind of mindset make? And I can answer some questions later about some specific projects we've become involved in. The usual sorts of questions about open access and pedagogy and asynchronous offerings that Martin has raised and our newfound ability to allow students a far more active role. These are all things that we're investigating. I'm not sure we have a lot of answers, but we can certainly see some directions. The degrees of openness we are exploring just as much as many other institutions are. Luckily, the MITs do exist, and the notion of the credibility of the open courseware, I think that's been dealt with. Just simply a question of asking ourselves the questions: why are we doing this? What are the end goals, and how do we want to achieve them? So I'll just stop there and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks very much, Evelyn. I think we're ready to head right over with Lisa Carter and Tony, whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks, Tracy. Thanks, everybody, for giving us the opportunity to present the significance of the Athabasca River Basin Research Institute repository, which I'm going to talk about in general terms today. This work couldn't have occurred without the tremendous support from Imperial Oil as well as the Royal Bank of Canada. And I'd also like to acknowledge the tremendous support of Steve Sheffer, the Director of Library Services, and our lovely dedicated core team, Tony Tin, Colin Elliott, and Tracy Woodburn. They've been so dedicated since the inception of the development of the Athabasca River Basin. Just to put things in a certain perspective, the Athabasca River Basin is an ecologically important, diverse watershed. It covers about 159,000 square kilometers. And within this watershed, and you can see here in the green area, there are about 300,000 people that occupy this space, of which about a third are Aboriginal, First Nations, and Métis origin. And so the diversity of this watershed is very expansive. As you can see, coursing through that green area is the Athabasca River. There are a number of lakes and tributaries, and the river itself is the longest undammed river, crossing over more than 1,500 kilometers. And it crosses through a variety of regions, alpine regions, boreal forests, various terrains, and it journeys through the basin, finally to empty out into the Peace Athabasca Delta. And the delta itself is the greatest freshwater delta in the world. And as a result, the various research and information that has to inform the communities as well as inform people, the government, and interested parties is extremely important to us within our province. So the knowledge of the impact of the Athabasca River Basin is critically important. We have to make informed decisions for the health and well-being of our communities. We have to shape policy, whether it occurs at the municipal or provincial or federal levels. And we have to create responsible stewardship of the environment. And having stewardship means that we would be able to propagate the well-being of the province as well as the area, not only for our children, but our children's children and their children's children. So having open access to materials that could make these informed decisions can help desperately to facilitate various processes. There's a lot of material in the form of reports and data analyses and images and maps and various studies that are available on the Athabasca River Basin. But unfortunately, access to this information is oftentimes difficult and cumbersome to retrieve. They're stored in various places throughout, not only throughout the province, but throughout the various provinces within Canada as well as internationally. So in 2009, we had decided to form an arm's length body called the Athabasca River Basin Research Institute to ensure that maybe that there would be a focus and a home for a lot of this material that can be easily accessible to anybody in an open fashion. And as a result, the Athabasca River Basin Research Institute was formed together with the beginnings of the formation and development of a web-based repository to facilitate some of these issues. So over the years, our amazing project team of people began to work on this very important initiative. And given the expansiveness and the diversity of the basin, information on the basin from a wide range of perspectives and angles, there was a lot of work put into this, and we had employed a number of research assistants to help gather this data in the early stages. But before we begin to understand the importance of the repository, I'd like to provide some background information on the Institute itself. In forming an institute, it allows us to formalize a body that can provide credibility and reputation in conducting the work and informing aspects of the basin. It also fosters a variety of linkages amongst people and communities coming from different areas and different viewpoints. And finally, it can provide an avenue for building relationships and a bank of experts in various fields. So this is a lovely way of knitting together people who have various strengths in different areas to allow them to come together in one focal site. And finally, it provides the support and mentorship for the expertise. Now, the Athabasca River Basin Research Institute was formed keeping these various perspectives in mind, and they embrace the notion of interdisciplinarity. And as I've mentioned, this is really the hub of the Institute as we see it. So therefore, excuse me, the vision and the mission of the Athabasca River Basin Research Institute is evident with, and you can see in blue, these are the various key terms that we felt were, and we believe are extremely important to provide and to proceed with our project. It has to be a trusted role of the Athabasca River Basin stakeholders, and they have to facilitate rather than dictate opening and for openness and transparency. So this is very, very important to us that information is there and can be used for individuals in a way that they deem fit in informing themselves of the basin. The mission actually talks about the Institute supporting this interdisciplinary research. It also talks about community and how we communicate with individuals within the community, and the dissemination of the information through knowledge transfer. And knowledge transfer can occur in a number of ways, not only for research among scientists and various scholars, but we have stakeholders such as our industry stakeholders, community members, the government, etc. There are 4 guiding principles that support the Athabasca River Basin Research Institute. First being knowledge acquisition, and second, engagement, whether it's at a personal level or at a community level. And thirdly, creating interdisciplinary connections. And I think you'll see that connections throughout all of these talks that we've had today are extremely important to us. And then finally, the dissemination of the various information that is provided. So as indicated, we have to take a multidisciplinary approach. Oh, I guess that the image didn't come up. This is often necessary because what we want to do, we want to paint a complete picture of the river basin. And the types of information that is prevalent is often determined what types of questions we're going to ask. For example, it can come from variety of perspectives. If you come from science, humanities, social science, business, etc., and it can touch a number of topics. And unfortunately, the image isn't shown here on the right-hand side of the page, but topics such as climate, community, land, water, policy, all of these topics are extremely important, and they could integrate amongst all of these various disciplinary areas. So we can gather this information in one area through our repository, and this can be extremely beneficial to our researchers, the public, government, and anybody that's interested in finding out about the basin. So over the years, we undertook a number of initiatives of the basin, and of course today we're just going to talk about the top initiative and how we are going to be expanding it as a repository. However, there have been other types of other smaller projects that we have been looking at, such as sustainability of communities, projects within Indigenous nations through the Learning Communities Project, and Blue Water Project, which is looking at also sustainability of communities, and of course near and dear to our hearts is science outreach with the various projects that are associated with the Athabasca River Basin, and a variety of community workshops that have been dealt with other external funding. The Athabasca River Basin Research Institute website is critical to us as we develop this project. This website is providing a focal point for access of the various initiatives that are conducted on the basin as well as the river, and it provides an anchor where people can access this information. They can find research reports, and they can also draw conclusions on general topics on the Athabasca River Basin. For example, I can give you an example. We've got one of the local high schools in Athabasca. They are actually doing a project on the pollution of a certain area of the basin, and they are now going to access. They are already, these young groups of kids, grade 7 students, are accessing parts of this website and finding out information for their project. So it's having a lot of excitement and interest. And so the building of the repository, and we have started with the bibliography of the Athabasca River Basin named BARB. This is absolutely integral for providing some sort of freedom for access and retrieval of all of those multiple reports and images and all sorts of other things that are available of the Athabasca River Basin that our researchers have been collating and collecting. The BARB site fits this bill because through its construction, and there's Tony that will be able to help to talk about the technicalities, because I don't pretend to understand the technical parts of all of this, but he can explain. And what the BARB does, it provides a flexible and nimble enough way to retrieve information, not only related to one disciplinary area. It can also draw in information that one is looking for that can possibly come from other disciplinary areas. And so therefore it paints a much broader, colorful picture for a person who is looking for different aspects of the basin as well as the river. So we've been working very long and hard in developing the capacity of this information to be housed in BARB. And I think it's 25,000 entries of a variety of manuscripts and reports and books and impact studies and databases. And all of this work has been tagged according to various keywords, authors, and titles, so that access to this information can happen in a very intuitive fashion. So in order to make this repository meaningful, the project team is focused on ensuring that it has richness of its content. So at the moment, as I've mentioned, the BARB contains these references to a variety of these reports and information. And they are, however, in order to find out what is contained in this information, it has to be retrieved elsewhere. So one of our major plans is to start building on the repository, that not only are we going to house these references, but eventually there's going to be complete digitization of materials and resources where possible. And so it's eventually our aim for the project team to expand beyond these limits of these reference materials, and to have easily retrievable image banks, for example, on the river and the basin, aerial maps that have been donated to us and we can use for open access, a variety of podcasts, audio and visual references. And all this information, which is really exciting, will be freely available to anybody worldwide. So some of the team members have begun to explore other means of accessing reference materials from a physical standpoint. We're looking at a web-based standpoint, and I know that there is now exploration of using QR code technologies, and so that people can use their smartphones or other types of mobile apparatuses to identify the landmarks of the Athabasca River Basin. And they could either listen to or they can read specific information of the basin. And this is an exciting aspect of the work. In addition, we are in discussions and collaborations with a number of professional organizations, associations, community groups who have expressed an absolute interest of the Athabasca River Basin. And we are building these organizations. For example, the Athabasca Watershed Council has developed a really impressive interactive atlas, and they've asked us to house this atlas on our BARB site, and our wonderful team is working to ensure that this will be available to everybody. So therefore, we've come full circle, emphasizing the importance of the Athabasca River Basin Research Institute and its repository, and to ensure that this information, no matter what the sources, can be made freely accessible and open for use in research and information. Our team can, of course, if there's time for questions, they can expand on the specific ways in which this repository was built, and here's some examples here. And perhaps what's most exciting is that the openness is encouraged by providing different ways in which this information can be accessed, rather than just sitting in front of a computer or a laptop. And in future, we are looking at smartphones and mobile devices that can easily retrieve this information at all points. So on a final note, as we continue to develop these various applications, our focus in the short term will be to complete populating the database and to begin looking at full text options. And we've got such a creative group of people, and you know, given the limited resources that we have right now, we hope to continue this project in the future. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for today's very informative presentations. These presentations and others will be made available on the Open Access Week website. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. If you have any questions, please type them into the side box there. But before we start questions, I would like to announce today's virtual door prize winners. We have 1% Yellow and T. Mason. I will put that in the chat box. So I'd like you to please send your email address to me, Tracy Woodburn. So I'm just going to put this in here. Okay, and if we have any questions. I see that Tony and Martin are both typing. You guys can also use your microphones as well if you'd prefer. Okay, so maybe we'll start here. Martin Connors has a question for you. Evelyn, if you'd like to address that one, please.
Hi, Martin. It's actually very simple. We've developed, I think, a really easy tutorial. We use Mahara, by the way, and one of the many reasons we chose that platform is that the university has Moodle as its LMS, and so there's a connection between the two of them. I'm not a very technical person, and I figured it out in half an hour, so I figured anybody else can as well. But the Mahara ePortfolio software is used all around the world. It's one of the standards. So I think that we have had very, very few in the way of requests from people asking for help, and we've got over 500 people using it right now. So I think that it's pretty accessible.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. And Martin, it looks like Tony has a question for you there in the sidebar.
Thanks, and I'm just going to take advantage of that to say to Evelyn that I think that this, as you mentioned, it can engage external organizations, and it's an example of our expertise being made available to outside organizations that in turn can come back and help us. So I think that's great. Now, the answer for me, what do you see as the future of massively online open courses? Basically, I see the future, and I think that the quotes that I showed you from the New York Times, for example, give evidence of a very rapid move in this direction towards credentialing them. And the abstract, I didn't really beat on this in the talk, but the abstract mentioned the term a currently empty public distance education space in the United States. I don't think it's going to be empty for very long. And I know that we have been looking at moving into that space with various degrees of seriousness over the past few years, and my prediction is that it's not going to be a space that we can move into anymore, which is kind of unfortunate in a way. But in another way, it was rather anomalous that this space existed in the first place. So that's basically what I see is going to happen. There will be this credentialing movement, and an interesting little tidbit or point is that I got a spam email the other day, and the spam email was saying, have you taken one of these massively open online courses? Why don't you come to us and we'll give you a credential for it? So it seemed to be a pseudo university trying to form itself by offering to take courses and give you a diploma. So rather than $50 in an envelope, it was, you know, we'll give you a diploma, you have to sort of show us you did these courses. So I thought that was an interesting development in spam anyway. Thank you.
Okay, I see that we still have people typing here, so we'll just wait around for a minute to see if we have any more questions, and we'll wrap it up maybe after the following question.
Hi, it's Tony here. I would like to pose a question to Dr. Lisa Carter and also our audience. We have done extremely well, like, you know, with Bob, and the response, like, you know, to the repository have been really positive. A lot of people would like to work with Athabasca University and work with Bob, like, you know, to build the research capacities and linking to resources. One of the challenges we have is, like, you know, is how we can enable, I used to enable full text access, like, you know, to all the report and information. Because at the meantime, like, you know, we can provide bibliographical information. However, like, you know, we have a lot of challenge trying to put a full text, like, you know, article, so that, like, you know, people can go and click and they can read the article instead of just reading, like, you know, bibliographical information. So I would like to pose that question to Dr. Lisa Carter audience. How do you see, like, you know, we can really actualize truly open access, like, you know, in an open learning environment? So this is my question. I'm going to pass the mic back to Dr. Lisa Carter or others, like, to respond.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, I think that there will be a challenge with this because some of the big bibliographies are located in a number of areas where accessibility might be restricted. However, I think if we start small and start building on it, I know we've been approached by several companies and individuals saying that they want their articles posted. I think I see think like a pirate. Sure, yeah. Um, uh, Several articles posted. I think it's a way of starting. This has to be also a university-wide discussion because I think the project will end up being larger than life itself, and so the selectivity, how we approach it, has to be very measured as we proceed with this.
Okay, Terry, I've got you as a host. You can go ahead and hopefully your mic's connected.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I guess I don't know enough about the exact database of the Athabasca River research basin research database, but I've seen a number of universities who end up with proprietary copyright materials in their database, and so they decide, oh well, we can't allow that to be shared, and therefore they don't have a sophisticated enough system to share what can be shared, so they shut the whole system down, at least to public access, because of the inclusion of some X% of copyright material. And I think the solution to that is just either have a sophisticated way to allow access to that which isn't copyright, or don't allow copyright material in. You know, let's put a stand and say, look, if you want to put your content, you want to get the exposure, then get a deal with your publisher or your institution or whoever owns that copyright, and you know, make it so the world can share it. Otherwise, we don't want it in our database.
I agree, Terry, and that's why I mentioned that we have to do it in a measured way. And a lot of people are volunteering their materials. It's probably a lot of the archival material that we would have to look at, and we've got a fantastic copyright office that can help us with that. But you know, the initiative is gaining momentum, and I'm hoping that we can just build on it as we move forward.
Hi, Terry. I think your point is really well taken. As a matter of fact, like, you know, we have used, like, you know, technology, like, you know, try to address all those issues. For example, like, you know, we can use the web cap, like, you know, to find the article and then actually linking to the article instead of, like, you know, saving, like, you know, or putting the article in our repository. Now, but the major challenge we have is not, like, you know, putting, like, you know, academic article. Is we have great difficulty dealing with, like, you know, company. For example, recently I received a call from the librarian. He told me he found an excellent, like, you know, resources about oil. Unfortunately, like, you know, the annual report is sitting, like, you know, in oil's company, like, you know, special library. So and then when the librarian called, like, you know, the oil company library, the librarian say, okay, they could not disclose the report, and then he kicked the ball back and say, if you really want it, you go and talk to the consultant. Then the librarian called the consultant, and consultant say they cannot, like, you know, disclose. They have to go back and talk to special library. So we are really frustrated because we find the resources and tell the people where they can find the resources, but, like, you know, for some reason, like, we're not, people are not going really where they could not find the information, and that's the frustration is.
Okay, Terry and Evelyn, you can also use your mics to reply if you'd like.
Hi. This is obviously something that we all struggle with, but and we run into it all the time because we're dealing with people in the media industry. And I think a lot of it is a shift in culture. So for example, Athabasca University has an open press, and when we first started to offer that, people would say to us, authors would say, well, how do you make any money? Well, of course, if people want the physical copy of the book, they simply pay for it. And I remember a conversation I had with Terry a few years ago about a book that he had decided to publish in that way, and it had increased his sales exponentially. So one of the things that we're considering doing, for example, when we're working with people who've produced original work, whether it's artists or writers or filmmakers, is to say, we can link this back to your website, and this in fact will increase the awareness of your work, but also perhaps sales. So I think there's a cultural shift that people have to engage in with respect to the notion of ownership.
Okay, so Tony, I think maybe this will be our last question. Terry, would you mind addressing this with your microphone? And then I think we'll have to wrap it up afterwards.
Sorry, I was a Skype call came in on the other line. So the question that you're asking me to address is, should we go for open textbooks? Well, I think we should always go for that's the whole theme of Open Access Week, and maybe that's how we should end the week, is to suggest that yes, the default should be open. And instead of spending money as Athabasca does in the millions on textbooks, we should be spending on seeding collaborative and cooperative development of textbooks so that not only our students can use them for free, but people around the world. And many countries in the world are adopting open textbook projects and platforms. And it's too bad maybe next year, if we're on Open Access Week again, we can do one on open textbooks. But British Columbia government just announced funding for 40 textbooks in the post-secondary system there. And we've been pressuring the Alberta government to do similar, but we're way behind in Canada, at least compared to the States and South Africa. But yes, open textbooks.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Today was our final day for Athabasca University's Open Access Week noon hour presentations. On behalf of all of our presenters and everyone here at AU, we'd like to thank you for your time and interest, and we hope to see you here next year for our 5th annual Open Access Week. So thanks very much, everybody, and we will now stop the recording for this session.